FairTax is coming, don't stand in the way. FairTax is coming across the USA. FairTax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey!
Hello and welcome again to FairTax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton, and unfortunately Ron Malero is on sick leave this week. So we have brought in an intrepid replacement that you have heard here on FTPR before. Randy Fisher, thank you so much for filling in for Ron today.
Oh, you're welcome, Bob. You're welcome. I always love being on with the FairTax guys.
Oh, and we love messing with you too, believe me. Quickly, before we get into today's subject, let's give people the opportunity to get a hold of us. The FairTaxGuys at gmail.com is our email address. Of course, we're on Facebook, the FairTax Guys. Just do a search on the FairTax Guys from Facebook. You'll find our page. Love to have a comment or a question from you. And this episode will be up on Spreaker in a couple of days. I think that's the 19th is Friday. And we will hopefully see you on the 23rd, right? I think that's the next Facebook Live event.
Yes.
It's the 23rd. I'm trying to think. I don't have a calendar in front of me. Is that Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to be late for that, so hopefully you can be there. That'll be a live interactive event that you can get on. We'd certainly appreciate your input on that one.
8 p.m.
8 p.m. Eastern Time, yes, with your comments and questions and what have you. And of course, Ron and I will be on the air with that, and Randy will be off in the other room with his little computer answering all your questions for you. You actually get the hard part of those things, don't you?
Yes. And that'll be at the official FairTax page, the national page, which is facebook.com/FairTax.
All right. Hope to see you all then. But in the meantime, let's get into something that was actually Ron's idea. And it's too bad he can't be here to follow through and execute on this. But he found an article at a website called The Motley Fool, which, in spite of its rather strange name, I think is a fairly legitimate website for personal finances, retirement, stuff like that. Do you know much about them? I don't.
Yeah, they started out as a stock picking, stock analysis site and grew into kind of a total financial research type firm.
Okay, so in spite of the name, it is a legitimate, is a serious site for real information about personal finances. And somebody there posted an article not long ago that it was 12 incredible income tax facts. And Ron came across that, and some of this, of course, is information and things we've been talking about here on FairTax Power Radio. But Randy, I'd like to kind of go through this one point at a time and bring up what this fellow was saying about the income tax and the U.S. tax code and get you to respond on how the FairTax would fix all of these particular problems that this gentleman is raising in this article. All right?
Will do.
Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Here we go. The first point, there are 10.1 million words in the U.S. tax code. Now, this is according to the Tax Foundation. It's approaching 10.1 million words. That's as of 2015. It's probably gone above that by now. 2.41 million words of the actual federal Internal Revenue Code, and a whopping 7.66 million with their tax regulations and stuff like that. And by comparison, this is the average novel, 64,000 words. And so the U.S. tax code could fill up more than 157 novels. The complexity of the tax code is incredible. The FairTax fixes that in a big way.
And the thing to remember about the FairTax is when it was filed in 1999, it was 131 pages. This year, when it was filed in 2017, it is 131 pages. It has not changed significantly. They've added one section to it, which is a sunset provision. That is roughly one paragraph. And when you compare that 131 pages of code to the 3,000 pages of the Internal Revenue Act, or just over 3,000 pages, you're looking at a difference that is just mind-boggling.
And a lot of that 131 pages is referencing current code that would be repealed. It does not take 131 pages to describe the FairTax.
Correct. There are about 8 pages that are simply cleanup, where they're repealing provisions in order to get rid of them and eliminate the current code. and all of the requirements that stem off of that. And there will probably be a series of regulations. There will be a series of regulations kicked out. But even at a 3-to-1 ratio, you're only talking about a 500-page total between the code and the regulations. And it's likely that they're not even going to be that long compared to 75,000 pages of code, regulation, and interpretation.
Yeah, 75,000 pages of code means this thing is so voluminous, so complex, that nobody, even the professionals whose job it is to keep up with this thing, and apply the tax code to their client's tax situation, they can't keep up with it.
No, there are thousands of tax attorneys out there who do nothing but analyze specific small provisions and how those provisions have been interpreted.
Mm-hmm. You are familiar with the survey the thing that Money Magazine did, way back in the 80s, 30 years ago, when they came up with this fictional family and sent that information out to 50 different tax preparers and got 49 different answers.
Yes, and all of them arguably were either correct or incorrect.
Yeah, so who knows? So the complexity of the tax code just staggers the mind. Another point this guy makes during this Motley Fool article is that as of 1955, the tax code was only 1.4 million words. Today, it's all nearly 10 times that, and that's just in my lifetime. That's amazing. And to go along with that, let's skip down to this next point, number 3. It says nearly 5,000 tax code changes were enacted. Not just proposed, enacted between 2001 and 2012. That is a horribly unstable system. Speak to that from a business owner's perspective, trying to plan for the future.
Well, the fact is, as a business owner, you can't really plan for the future because you don't know whether your deductions, whether your amortization, and how your capital acquisitions are going to be treated from year to year. And you don't know what your payroll taxes, how stable that's going to remain. The cost of your employees is likely to change. And the fact that you now have health insurance requirements still under the Affordable Care Act until it's actually repealed. You have health insurance that can impact that, or the penalties for not providing health insurance can impact that. So employers are in a horrible planning state because they simply don't know what they can rely on and what not rely on.
Yeah, that just adds up to total uncertainty. And when you're so uncertain, you're afraid to make any moves. You're afraid to build new plants. You're afraid to hire new people.
Right. You're afraid to grow from state to state because of the complexities that are compounded by the state tax laws that are layered on top of the federal tax law.
All right, finish this sentence. And the FairTax fixes that by
eliminating the payroll tax is the largest component, by eliminating business-to-business taxes, so no business input is taxed. One business can purchase from another business without any payment of a tax or any necessity to track and report that as an expense item to anyone in the future. And it eliminates it by paying retailers to simply do what they're already doing in 45 states, which is collect and transmit a sales tax.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take 100 pages of instructions to do that like it does with a 1040 form.
No, it takes a half a page report form from a retailer filed electronically to the state sales tax agency.
So the FairTax is much superior to what we've got on that one. Now, this is a biggie. Something else that Ron and I have talked about a lot on this. This was the compliance costs that the income tax system imposes on American business, which are, just like any other cost of doing business, passed on down the line to the consumers. In some cases, it's borne by the shareholders in the form of lower dividends and by the employees in the form of, lower wages and benefits. But the bottom line is that all of these compliance costs are paid by individuals somewhere, somehow, not the corporations themselves. And the FairTax fixes that in a major big way.
Yeah, the complexity of this law, of our current law, is such that employers are spending as much as $15, I believe it is, or more per working hour in order to try and comply with the various taxes that they have to be concerned about. And that includes the payroll tax, which is a difficult tax to comply with because salaries change all the time, and then you have to recalculate. The caps change from time to time, and again, you have to recalculate. And if you pay a service to do that for you, you still have to provide the information to the service. And all of that takes away time from the business to do what it needs to be doing, which is its own business. So it loses opportunity. And there's an estimate that the lost opportunity cost to the economy is over $1 trillion per year.
Wow. Interesting notes in this little article here that says the IRS suggested that taxpayers would spend an aggregate 8.9 billion with a B hours complying with federal income taxes for 2016. That's the equivalent of 13,000 lifetimes. Wow. That's just to comply with the code, over and above your actual tax liability.
Yeah, and they were estimating in this article 409 billion plus almost 100 billion in individual income tax compliance. And I had read that it was going to end up being closer to 600 billion combined. So it does go up, and it goes up significantly each year.
And of course, the cost of all that is rolled into the price of everything that we buy, and it's rolled into the price of things that are exported out of the country, making American goods at a decided disadvantage in the world market.
And a lot of those businesses are subchapter S, which is a pass-through. So they have the double complexity of their own personal tax situation combined with their business tax situation. And the effect of that also raises the costs of the business products and services, all of which is ultimately paid by individuals, by consumers.
And with the fair tax, that goes away. I mean, 80, I've heard say 80. I think it's going to be even higher, that compliance costs will go down by at least 80%, probably more.
Yeah, the estimates I've seen are between 90 and 92% lower compliance costs.
Yeah, I mean, that is eliminating a huge cost on business, because all you got to do, the computer will do this for you. You collect the tax on all of your eligible purchases. Your point of sale software tells you how much you've collected and how much you just remit to the state sales revenue department at the end of the month. And the fair tax works exactly the same way.
And it's only retailers that end up collecting the fair tax. The majority of businesses do not sell retail. The retail market is about 2.5 million businesses in the United States out of a total number of businesses, which I think is closer to 100 million. Mm-hmm. So the retail market itself is pretty stratified. Roughly 15% of the retail market sells 90 to 92% by dollar volume of the new goods that are sold in the United States. So you're talking about 500 to 600 national and regional retail chains, and that represents about 15% of the market, and they sell about 90% of the new goods that are sold by dollar volume.
Now that kind of leads into another subject here. That would be the efficiency of the current system. It costs the IRS a lot of money, relatively speaking, to collect the taxes that they've got. In fact, they said they estimated 35. This article says the IRS spent 35 cents for every $100 in tax collected. That doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to what the collection and the administration costs for the fair tax would be, that is huge.
Yeah, that's a losing proposition any way you look at it. And over the last few years, because of sequestration, they did shrink the size of the IRS, which made it even more inefficient. When it comes down to doing audits, for example, Steve Hayes published some numbers about the number of audits actually performed by the IRS. Most of those are by mail rather than in-person audits. and if I remember right, it's 0.7% of returns are less than 0.7% are audited, and less than 0.02% of those audits are in-person audits. So that is one of the many reasons why the tax evasion level has skyrocketed to what it has.
Yeah, that's another point of this article. It says tax evasion costs the federal government $458 billion a year. And because it is just, Randy, you could not start with a clean sheet of paper and design a more fraud-prone, more error-prone, more inefficient way to fund the government than what the current income tax has become.
It takes one to cheat under the current system. It takes two to cheat under the FairTax. That starting point alone is what opens the door for massive and growing evasion under the current system.
Now, that is the one point that we think is getting the politicians' ear up in Washington. Because so far, they've been really reluctant to make any changes to the income tax because it's been a gravy train they've ridden for a long time, selling tax favors for campaign cash. But now when they're realizing just how much the current system is leaving on the table, we are beginning to see some progress with the fair tax on the evasion issue.
Yeah, it's approaching and is going to attain almost a 30% evasion rate within the next decade. I think right now it's at about 23%, and they estimate that it's going to go to a 30% evasion rate in the next decade. And the reason that it's growing, and it's growing as fast as it is because of the way our economy has changed.
I was going to ask you to speak to that point. How does it get worse and worse every year?
Fewer and fewer people are working as traditional W-2 withholding workers. More and more of our economy, and they call it a gig economy, meaning that it's more electronic, and actually what people work, rather than long-term, steady, traditional jobs, they work dozens of short gigs. And that means they may be a consultant for a group of restaurants in a region to do their social media work, or they may be a part-time worker in another business, and they may be an Uber driver, or they may have an eBay store, or they may be doing things like Airbnb or even dog walking gigs.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people out there that are making $75,000 to $125,000 per year and reporting $19,000.
Yeah, and a lot of that is cash that never gets reported at all.
Well, even if it's not cash, it's payments that aren't tracked traditionally by the IRS. They just don't show up because there's not a lot of 1099 forms, and there are no W-2 forms.
So again, I've heard Steve Hayes talk about this. In order to fix the evasion problem, you've got to exacerbate the inefficiency problem as far as how much it costs you to collect these taxes, because you have to hire hundreds, if not thousands, of more auditors and enforcement agents.
Yeah, they were talking about adding as many as 20,000 more IRS employees, because for each auditor you add, you have to have support for that auditor. So you're going to be looking at taking the IRS back up over 110,000 employees. I think it peaked at some point at about 111,000 employees, and then it dropped down to around 88,000. And I think right now they're around 90,000 employees.
Have there been any studies done, to your knowledge, of what it would cost to collect the fair tax, i.e. this thing says 35 cents for every $100. What would that number look like under the fair tax, or guesstimate?
Well, I think they've looked at what the experience has been with the state sales tax programs, and I think you'd be talking pennies on the dollar, or fractions of pennies on the dollar in terms of costs, because the vast majority of it is going to be electronically collected, audited, transferred, and capable of being tracked without anyone having to go anywhere to do anything.
And you touched on this earlier, that the fair tax will reduce the number of audit points, if you will, collection points, from 140 or some million individual taxpayers and businesses down to a relatively small number of big box retailers. It will be so much easier to enforce because so much of the action is going to take place in a relatively small slice of the economy.
Well, even when you add in all of the small retail businesses and service businesses, you're still only talking about around 2.5 million to 2.7 million total, but that's nationwide. You divide that up, and they're not distributed evenly, of course, but you divide that up by state, and you're talking about the number of retailers that can easily be tracked by a moderate-sized state agency.
So you're talking about going from 140 million different things to keep your eye on down to less than 3.
Yes.
And the efficiency of that is through the roof with the FairTax. And we've done a study, the Sebula study, on the evasion rates for sales taxes versus income tax.
Well, they've done the study of the estimated future growth of the income tax evasion. The study on the comparable level of potential evasion under the FairTax is in process, and it's roughly a month from completion. Just the preliminary work that they did seemed to show that the rate would be under 2%. And that's based on a study that California did. I believe California had as much as $50 billion in collected sales taxes, and they had an evasion rate or a non-reporting and collection rate of about 2.8%.
Wow. So
they think that nationwide for the FairTax, the rate's going to be lower than that because California, being as diverse as it is, with a lot of businesses opening and closing and disappearing quickly, you're going to have a slightly higher evasion rate there than you would have nationally.
So it fixes the evasion problem pretty much. It fixes the complexity problem extensively. It reduces, almost eliminates compliance costs.
It stabilizes the funding for Social Security and Medicare because 35.14% of the total FairTax collected goes directly to funding Social Security and Medicare. It fixes the stability in terms of the predictability for businesses, and they can plan and grow with knowledge that the economy is going to remain stable and is going to grow.
So the FairTax fixes so many problems. Another one that I think we got time to hit one more before we run out of time here was it's talking. This article on the Motley Fool says the highest marginal tax rate right now. Of course, this was before this the latest what they're working on now, but it's 39.6% was the highest marginal rate, and they said that's quite low historically. But the FairTax lowers that even further for the people who will be paying the highest rate under the FairTax because it spreads out the tax base so much.
And the article leaves out the 15.3% FICA payroll tax. So when it talks about a 39% rate, you have to add in 15.3% on top of that because the employee, and particularly a self-employed person, is paying that 15.3% one way or another. So that puts that total rate as high as 54%. And you reach a point of diminishing return there where people just don't take income. They consciously avoid it and have it go in other places and other channels, which then turns around and starts hurting the economy.
Oh, mercy. Okay, one more point here I got to hit on as well. This article mentions that 66% of the taxpayers under the federal income tax system get a federal refund. Now, that means 66% of the people are going to get a refund once per year. Under the FairTax, 100% of the taxpayers will get a refund once a month. Which system would you like to have?
I would definitely prefer the FairTax. And now that monthly tax refund under the FairTax is for eligible citizens and resident registered legal aliens.
Legal citizens.
Now, if you're incarcerated, you don't get the fair tax. So don't count on
probably
receiving.
not going to be buying a whole lot of stuff out of a prison cell, I wouldn't think. But.
Don't count on receiving your fair tax prebate if you're in prison.
Mm-hmm. But that's it. People, I've heard people say that, if you take away this income tax, then I don't get my refund anymore. No, you get a refund once a month instead of once a year. Because again, and it's not an entitlement. People have been saying, that's an entitlement. You shouldn't give that to rich people. You're getting your own money back. It's like paying, giving the clerk a $20 bill for an $18 purchase and getting $2 back. You're just getting change back. Stuff you overpaid, you're getting your change back with this prebate.
Yeah, it's really letting the citizen keep their money until they've spent more than the minimum required to feed, clothe, and house themselves and their family.
Yeah, the fair tax will not tax your spending until your spending exceeds the poverty level. And you know what the poverty level for your household size is. You will register for this prebate. How many people are in your household? What are their social security numbers? They'll check that out to make sure everything's legal. And then they figure out, you're going to spend that money anyway. X number, 23% of that is going to be fair tax. We'll give that back to you. So nothing comes out of your pocket until your spending exceeds the poverty level, and it can be done so simply. You don't have to keep track of everybody's spending to make that work.
And again, that enhances your predictability as an individual. You know predictably how to budget yourself for the month.
And it's very progressive in its application. Sales tax normally is regressive and will hit the poor harder than it will hit the rich people. With the prebate, plus you bring home your whole paycheck now, no federal withholding, the fair tax is a boon to people on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. So
let's get it passed.
Let's do it. All right, how can we do that? Go on to PopVox is probably one of the better ways to do that. Because you're looking at me funny. Yeah, the Congress critters, as Ron calls them, they have staff that keeps an eye on PopVox.
Yes, and PopVox, remember, you can vote positively for the two fair tax bills, H.R. 25 and S.18. You can also vote against. There's a flat tax bill that was filed in the Senate. There are a couple of Democrat bills, one to include a consumption tax plus an income tax plus a business value added tax, and you can definitely vote against those bills and put in reasons why you want the fair tax instead of those bills.
BigSolution.org, that's one of your babies. Go.
Campaign site for the fair tax, Big Solution. It's the one that you can go to and point your friends, family, coworkers to, that gives the bullet point reasons for supporting the fair tax. There's 17 reasons and then a drop-down arrow with 3 or 4 bullet points underneath each reason. There's a connect button, which means you put in your information to connect with the fair tax database. You can sign up family, you can sign up friends. They will get an email that will give them the option of continuing to receive fair tax information or not. You can support fair tax by signing the petition on the support page, and you can contribute to fair tax because we need your help. We're looking to start a media fund for off-hour radio ads.
Yeah, that's one thing we haven't seen was hardly any mention of the fair tax at all in the media, either paid or as just part of the debate and discussion.
Well, the large national media like Fox Business News, CNBC, and those, it costs thousands and thousands of dollars to hire a booker and get on those shows. But we're working with a group in the Chicago area. They have funded week to week and month to month a 2-play set of radio ads on WLS in Chicago.
Okay, well, hopefully that'll work. And we are out of time. Randy, thank you so much for filling in for Ron. Hopefully he'll be back with us next week. But so we'll see you again. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me.
You're quite welcome. Again, the fairtaxguys@gmail.com is our email address. Like us on Facebook. See us at our next Facebook Live event. Until then, this is Bob Paxton reminding you that the fair tax is a big solution for big problems. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Bingo.
Fair tax is coming, don't stand in the way. Fair tax is coming across the USA.